Well, we're wrapping up our series, Stories That Challenge Me, just picking some of my favorite stories and just looking at them and just, once again, coming out of what Paul writes in Romans 15. For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through endurance and encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. All these stories are there for a reason. They're there to give us encouragement, to give us guidance, to give us comfort in the battles that we face. You can ask, why study these stories? Well, Paul tells us they teach us. First and foremost, they teach us about God, but they also teach us about ourselves. They teach us about the world. They teach us about our adversary. They also encourage us. We realize that the struggles we're facing aren't unique to us. We aren't the only person who's ever faced this battle. Many others have fought these battles over the same territory. And there is encouragement in seeing how God delivered them and God was with them through their battles. They give us hope. The story of David's battle against Goliath has given hopes to underdogs since the day it happened. It's interesting. I jumped online just looking up the term David and Goliath. And I mean, there are, football teams that describe their battles as David and Goliath battles. There are companies that talk about David and Goliath. There are, I think Israel's newest weapon system is David's Sling is the name of it. This story goes beyond the Bible. People who don't know hardly anything about the Bible know about David and Goliath. So that's where we're going to be today. Let's get the context of the story. Israel has a king. When they started out, they didn't have kings. They had judges. There were prophets. Israel now has a king. They wanted to be like everyone else. And so they went to Samuel, the judge, the prophet, and said, come on. We look around at all these countries around us. And I mean, we're the backwater people. We're the Johnny-come-latelys. All of them have kings to lead them. The Amorites have a king. The Philistines have kings. The Egyptians have Pharaoh, who's like super king. So we want a king too. And so God gives them a king, lets them have a king, and in pretty short fashion, their king shows that he is just as human and just as prone to flaws as all the judges who had come before him. Saul, the king, is so worried about public opinion that in one of the first big campaigns he has against the Amalekites, he disobeys God and crashes his whole dynasty. God basically says, I was going to give you a dynasty that would remain on the throne forever, but you disobeyed me. And so therefore you're going to be the only king of the Saul dynasty. And when later he goes after the Philistines start to encroach on Israel's territory. Saul goes after them and he makes some rash decisions that cost Israel the total victory they could have had. He says, basically what he says is, okay, we're going into battle, nobody can eat today until you have totally defeated my enemies. Well, guess what? People got very hungry. People began to pass out on the battlefield. And the Philistines get away. And so now here they are, sometime later, they are back and they are resurgent. They're looking to take back territory. I've never been there, but this is a photo of the area where this battle took place. And the reason I bring this up is because one of the things I want to remind us is that these things are these are true. These are not, these are not made up stories to challenge us to think a certain way. These are actual historical events. This is where this took place. And so you'll see Soko in Judah there. You'll see that's the area of the Philistine camp. Saul's camp is on the hill right here, and you can see the valley of Elah in between there. It goes down that way quite a ways. It comes up and then it wraps around this hill that is kind of the center of Saul's army. It wraps around that hill and comes back this way towards us. And there is a stream that runs through there. There's a stream that runs through there. That gives you a picture. Here's kind of a map of it. Where that photo was taken was from someplace up in here. And so Soko, they spell it differently. Get back there. Soko was down here. You can see it on the other map. That gives you an idea of what it looks like, of what the, how the armies were arranged that day. And so as the story opens, the Philistines have gathered strength and they are ready to attack Israel again. They gathered in Soko down here and then spread their battle lines, spread their camp all along, kind of wrapping in that kind of a U-shaped formation there. Saul and the Israelites, they set up camp across the valley from them. And apparently nobody seems to feel confident in actually attacking the other one. I don't know if it's because, they're up on a hill. You realize that if we attack them, we're going to have to be running uphill, and they're going to be showering arrows and rocks and everything down on us. So I'll tell you what, why don't we just stay on our hill and let them come to us? And so they end up, the whole thing degenerates into a stalemate. And they end up just kind of, every day they'll line up for battle. And they go out there, and I don't know if they yell, we've got spirit, yes we do. We've got spirit, how about you? And the Philistines, we've got spirit, yes we do. We've got spirit, how about you? But they taunt each other for a little bit, and then they go back to their camps. That's all they do. Until, at some point, one of the Philistine soldiers, a champion from the town of Gath, which isn't too far from the battlefield. He just, and he doesn't do this on his own. I'm sure his king tells him he can do this. But he begins to ratchet things up. He lumbers out onto the battlefield, and because he's as tall as a tree, that's how he walks. He lumbers. Think about it. And he begins to shout his own personal challenge to the Israelites. And I know that, the Sunday I wasn't here, Tony, we won't have you resurrect your Goliath part. But, you got an idea when Tony was standing on a chair of, how tall. Goliath is a big man. And he's not gangly, skinny big. He is burly big. 9 feet, because we're given Jewish measurements and some of them you're not 100% sure. The best guess is 9 foot 9 inches tall. 9 foot 9 inches tall. He's wearing 125 pounds of scale armor. So that's bands of armor overlaid on each other and goes, covers pretty much his whole front down to maybe all the way down to his knees. He has a bronze helmet on his head. His legs are wrapped in bronze. He's carrying a spear that looks like a fence post, and it has a 15-pound iron tip on the end of it. And so he strolls out, lumbers out onto the battlefield, and he shouts his challenge to out to the Israelites. Why are we wasting our time lining up for battle like this? You want to kill Philistines? I'm a Philistine. Find a man among you that's brave enough to come face me. If he can beat me, we'll become your servants. And if I beat him, all of you belong to me. You belong to us. I defy the men of Israel to beat me. Give me a man and we'll fight. We'll end this whole thing today. There is no stampede of men to go fight Goliath. And in fact, what actually happens is, I'm guessing, you're stepping back and, Charlie's just standing here looking, everybody's stepping back. And, Charlie, you volunteering? What? No, I'm not going. I mean, nobody wants to get killed by this guy. Maybe they're all hoping Saul will fight him. Because if you're familiar with the story, one of the reasons everybody thought Saul would make a good king is because he looked the part. And when I say he looked the part, do you remember what the description is of Saul? He was a head and shoulders taller than everybody else. Don't tell me that somebody in that army wasn't thinking, well, come on, if somebody has to fight Goliath, who's the tallest man in Israel? Let Saul go down and fight him. And Saul's going, no, you need a king. Remember? You guys wanted the king. I'm the king. So surely you don't want the king going down there and fighting this beast. Oh my goodness, what are you going to do here? So Saul's thinking, hold on here, boys. Listen, I'll make it worth your while. Tell you what I'm going to do. Any man who offers to go and fight Goliath, if you survive, you can have my daughter's hand in marriage. And your family will never have to pay taxes again, or your next of kin, if you don't survive. It's amazing how much we will be willing to pay to have people do what we should be doing, right? You ever notice that? It's amazing how much we're willing to pay to have somebody else do what we should be doing. But it doesn't work. Saul isn't taking the challenge and nobody else is stepping up. So every morning for more than a month, this goes on. Both armies line up. Goliath steps out. He shouts his taunts, his insults, his ridicule, his jibes. And every night the men of Israel crawl back into their tents feeling just a little bit smaller than they did in the morning. And then on day 40, something different happens. A young man shows up in the Israelite camp. He's bringing supplies for his 3 older brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, who are serving. I would say fighting, but they're not fighting, are they? They're just standing there every day. They are serving in Saul's army. And just as David arrives, the army is trudging out into position. They're taking up their place in the battle lines. And David assumes that the battle is about to start. Wow, what luck. I actually get to be here on the day of the battle. He drops the supplies off and he scoots to the front lines to talk with his brothers. And while he's chatting with them and with the other soldiers in their unit, Goliath steps out and starts to shout his daily challenge. Isn't there a man among you who is willing to face me? I defy your sniveling army to produce one champion who's willing to fight me. David watches to see who's going to step out to fight this guy. So he hadn't been there the previous 40 days. But no one does. Instead, they all take that step backward. They all suddenly are looking very interested at their hands or looking at the ground. Nobody is volunteering to face this Philistine. And David hears talk among the men around him of a reward that the king is offering to the man who faces Goliath. And David's thinking, a reward? Wait a minute. You're telling me that we have to bribe our soldiers to fight this Philistine? Who does this Philistine think he is, defying the armies of the living God? His older brother Eliab hears what David is saying and shut up. Why aren't you home watching the sheep? You have no business up here trying to stir up a fight just so you can watch. Someplace in the process, word gets back to Saul that there's somebody out there in the front lines who sounds like they might be interested in facing Goliath. So Saul sends for this guy. Nobody has stepped forward so far. He's probably a little bit disappointed when this teenage shepherd boy walks in. Oh, man. Maybe he smiles when David says to him, David walks into the king's presence and says, don't be afraid of this Philistine. I'll fight him for you. Saul's probably going, yeah, and if you lose, we all become their slaves. Saul shakes his head as the glimmer of hope that he had fades. Are you out of your mind? You're only a boy. He has been a warrior since his youth. But David's answer catches him. David says, you're right, I am only a shepherd boy. But even I know that there are times when you have to fight. Even a little shepherd boy knows there comes a time when you have to take a stand and you have to fight for what's right. When a lion or a bear attacked my father's flock, I didn't just stand back and watch it happen. I went after it and I rescued the sheep. If it turned on me, I didn't run. I seized it by the hair and I killed it. Now please help me understand this, my king. If I, just me, have killed lions and bears, what are this Philistine's chances when me and God walk out onto that battlefield? He will be no different than the lion or the bear, because he has defied the armies of the living God. And something stirs inside of Saul. Maybe it's the image of a shepherd who fights to save his flock while Saul knows I've been cowering in my tent. Maybe it's the reminder that Goliath's challenges aren't against Saul and Israel, they're actually against God. But something stirs in Saul, and Saul agrees to let David be Israel's champion. Don't ever overlook that. I have to give him some credit for that, because Saul agrees to send David out there. Maybe that's an indication that they weren't going to honor the agreement anyway. If I beat him, then you'll become my slaves. And Saul's going, yeah, well, that's not going to happen. Maybe they didn't intend to honor the agreement anyway. But I'll give Saul the benefit of the doubt and say, I'll give him some credit and say, he did agree. He agreed. I think he saw something in David and said, man, oh man, maybe God is going to do something here. Saul even offers David his own armor for protection. And please understand, that's a major thing. If David falls on the battlefield, Saul's armor is gone. Some Philistine is going to take it as a prize. And if you don't remember, at this time, one of the reasons the Philistines are so powerful is they had the monopoly on iron. There are only two swords. There are only two iron swords in all of Israel. Saul has one, his son Jonathan has the other. Because the Philistines won't let the Israelites have iron. The only blacksmiths are in Philistine territory. If you want your farm implements honed up, you had to go to Philistine blacksmiths, because the Philistines weren't going to let iron technology fall into the hands of the Israelites. So when Saul gives his armor to David, that does say something. David puts on the armor, he tries to take a few steps, and he decides, this isn't for me. I can't use this stuff. I'm not used to it. So instead he grabs his shepherd's staff and he trots toward the battlefield. He has his sling with him. And along the way he stops and he picks up 5 smooth stones from the nearby stream bed. As David approaches, goes onto the battlefield, Goliath sees a challenger coming. And he begins to move forward. But then Goliath sees that his challenger is just this teenage boy. And he's actually insulted. He's actually insulted. He says to David, am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? David's got a shepherd's staff and his sling. Saul is just totally, Goliath is totally insulted that this is the champion. It's an insult that you would send me a boy. And the Philistines, it says, cursed David by his gods, by Goliath's gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And you know the rest of the story, right? A miracle happens. As David prepares, as Goliath prepares to destroy David, David begins to run towards Goliath. And then he stops, he plants his feet, and he begins to whirl his sling in a, interestingly enough, because I looked this up, I always thought they would do something like this, and actually, I don't know if I can do the right arm motion for it. They would, Israeli Jewish slingers would do like a figure 8 motion. And I can't even really, I mean, it was like one time over this way, and then one time over this way, and then this way, and this way, and on that 4th swing right about here, then they'd release it and said it would look like a baseball pitcher pitching. So David goes through, he begins to whirl the sling in that figure 8 motion, 3 or 4 revolutions, and he lets the stone fly, and he hits Goliath between the eyes. There's this look of surprise on Goliath's face, then confusion, and he takes another step and he stumbles down to his knees, and then he collapses to the ground unconscious. David runs up, and he's unconscious because we're told when he's killed. David runs up, takes Goliath's sword, and cuts off his head. Miracle. But I want you to think about this. Where exactly did the miracle happen? Where exactly was the miracle? Was the miracle in the stones David picked up? Because see, in doing background reading all this, there are some people who would say it was the stones he picked up. Because see, in certain parts of the valley of Elah, there are stones that are denser than any other stones you'll find in Israel. And so he hit, Goliath, God had provided denser stones, and so the rock did much more damage. Okay, maybe. Was it that the stone hit Goliath square in the forehead? I mean, like a miracle shot. Well, it could be, but the Bible tells us that the tribe of Benjamin boasted a whole division of left-handed slingers who could put a rock on target from, get this, 300 to 400 yards away. They could put a rock on target from 300 to 400 yards away. Matter of fact, the Bible also tells us that they could aim at a hare, not a hare like a rabbit. This, Jim, I'm kidding. They can aim at a hare and they wouldn't miss it. So is the miracle that David hit Goliath right where he aimed? Is the miracle that Goliath collapsed after being hit? Well, to answer that question, I want you to realize, when I think of a sling, I'm thinking of a little slingshot, and I'm thinking of a bullet for a slingshot, a little rock or something like that. If you go online and just look up ancient sling, quote, bullets, slingers tended to use things that went from golf ball size to tennis ball size. Now, you tell me, if you get hit right there by a tennis ball sized rock going 60 to 80 miles an hour minimum, any chance you're going to collapse? Is it a miracle that you collapse? It'd be a miracle if you survived. That's what a miracle would be, if you survived. So where was the miracle that day? And I haven't reached the bottom of that question yet. Maybe it's all of the above. Maybe it's none of the above. But wrestling with that question has led me to ask maybe a deeper question. What did David take onto the battlefield that day that nobody else seemed to possess? All of those guys were standing there and heard the exact same challenges, including Saul. They all had heard Goliath's challenges for 40 days, and they had known that there was a Philistine threat for well over 40 days, for maybe 3 months. And nobody else was willing to go into that valley. What is it David had? What is it that David had that nobody else seemed to possess? As I move into battle against the giants in my own life, whatever David had is something I want. So let me stop long enough to pick up the 5 smooth stones that I use against my Goliath this week. I think David had a radical trust in God. I think David had a radical trust in God. David knew going in. He said it to Saul. He said it to his brothers. The battle belongs to the Lord. How many times have you gone into your battle and what you were telling yourself was not at all the battle belongs to the Lord? It was the battle belongs to whatever, something else. It was the giant. The battle belongs to the giant. God help me, because the battle belongs to the giant. David says the battle belongs to the Lord. What does David know about his God that you need to know about your God in the battle you are facing? David had an unshakable faith in God's power and in God's goodness. Goliath is insulted to see a boy running toward him with a staff in his hand. He grabs his spear. He begins to move forward. David begins to sprint. Goliath swears at David and shouts, am I a mangy dog? You come at me with a stick, I'll feed you to the birds. I'll feed you to the animals, you impudent little blinkety-blanket and freaking fracking, and cusses him out with every word he knows. David shouts back at Goliath, you come against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This is before he's hit him in the face with a rock. He's already got a picture in his mind of this is how it's going to turn out. This is what, if God has already told him that, then he's holding on to what God told him. God told me this is what's going to happen. I'm going to believe that. I'm going to run towards you. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army, not just you, Goliath. I'm getting all of you guys. I'm getting all of you guys. You can take that to the bank. May as well write out your wills and write your moms a letter, because by the end of this day, you're no more. The whole world will know, this is part of what David says, the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. Now, I don't know what your battle is, but maybe all those here will know it is not by doctors that the Lord saves. It's not by a big bank account that the Lord saves. It's not because you're the smartest person in the room that the Lord saves. Your victory does not come because you are the most qualified. It comes because God has chosen to give you victory. He has told you to believe him, and you have believed him, and you have acted on that belief. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. You see, radical faith does not mean that David is being presumptuous. He prepares. He doesn't walk empty-handed into the valley and say, well, God told me I was going to get a victory. He prepares, but that doesn't belie a radical trust in God. Did you ever notice that when Jesus feeds the 5,000, at the end of that time, he says, hey guys, go ahead and pick up all the pieces. I know if I'd have been there, I'd have been thinking, what for? We'll pick up one piece. And if we get hungry, you can pray over that one piece and we'll have plenty of food for everybody. Why do we have to pick it all up? No, God doesn't waste things, I guess. Even the God who can produce everything out of a little, something out of nothing, still says, don't waste what I gave you. Don't waste what I gave you. Be a steward of it. I just see that I see a radical trust in God, but that radical trust means that David prepares. You'll read Bible scholars who say, why did he pick up 5 stones? And some will say, well, Goliath had 4 brothers. Not 100% sure that Goliath had 4 brothers. He might have. We're going to talk about the 4 other giants later on. I don't know if David picked up 5 stones because he knew Goliath had 4 brothers. Maybe. I'll be honest, my personal opinion is he picked up 5 stones because sometimes you miss on your first shot. Well, that doesn't sound very miraculous. You're right. David's a realist. Even the best of slingers can miss on their first shot. I do notice it too. When David goes out into the valley, he chooses to fight naturally. He chooses to fight naturally. He doesn't wear Saul's armor. This doesn't work for me. He chooses to fight the way a shepherd boy would fight. In other words, he trusted God. He trusted that God had already prepared him for this battle. That through all of the previous battles in his life, God had prepared him for this battle in his life. And so as I go into this valley, I will not be afraid, because I believe God has prepared me for this battle. I remember my dad in the last years of when he was battling Alzheimer's. You know, you have that period of time where Dad knows he has Alzheimer's, and he's suffering from Alzheimer's. He's doing some of the stuff that Alzheimer's people do. He knows he has Alzheimer's, but the Alzheimer's hasn't taken full control of him yet. And there would be nights when my mom would say, "Could you come over and talk to your dad for a while?" Because Dad was just fretting over everything under the sun. And I'd go over and we'd just begin talking, and we'd talk about everything that Dad had been through in the past. Like the time when he was on a boat one night on a river in Suriname. It was a passenger boat, and they hit a log and the boat went down. My dad doesn't swim. And they're in the jungle. They're not near any settlement. They're in the jungle, and the boat sinks. And, you know, Dad knew that God had protected him that night. Nobody was killed. A lot of cargo was lost, but nobody was killed. There were maybe 30 or more people on the boat. And we talked about the night that Dad spent in the jungle after the boat sank. We talked about the time he had to walk down a guy who was angry over something Dad had said or preached. And the guy had an arrow aimed at him, and Dad walked up to him and took the bow and the arrow away from him. Talked about the time that Dad walked up and pulled the shotgun away from the guy who had a shotgun on him. Talked about the time that somebody stole the machete from the mission compound, and Dad went to the village where the guy lived, and the guy came after him with the machete, and Dad took the machete from him. We talked about the times, you know, where in raising all of us kids and all the stuff we pulled and the battles he fought with us. And I remember time after time, you know, I would just ask Dad, I would say, you know, did you ever think that maybe all of those battles from the past were just preparation for this, the biggest battle of your entire life? To suffer through Alzheimer's, but to do it in a way that gives God honor and glory. And it was amazing, because we had this conversation dozens of times, maybe more than that. Same conversation. It was always new to Dad. But every time, by the time we got to the end of the conversation, Dad would have calmed down. He'd say, "Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess you're right." He could recognize that all of the battles he'd fought in the past had prepared him for the battle he was now facing. And so I ask you, had God prepared David for the battle he faced that day? Or did David have to learn on the spur of the moment? I mean, just consider this. What kind of battle was Goliath expecting that day? Think about it. He's armed with a javelin. You do throw a javelin. He's armed with a spear. A spear is primarily not a throwing thing. It's just to give you some distance and jagging. And then he's armed with a sword. I think Goliath was expecting a sword fight. That's what he's used to. Big old guy, got a big old sword, and we'll have a sword fight, and I know I'll win. I think that's what Saul was expecting, because how does Saul armor David up? He armors him up for a sword fight. But see, David didn't go into the battle to fight as heavy infantry. He's a slinger. He is an archer. He isn't planning to get up there right under Goliath and fight him. He's going to stand back 50 yards, 60 yards, who knows how far. And he's going to fight like a shepherd boy would fight. Do you remember this classic scene from the first Indiana Jones movie? brought a sword to a gunfight. He brought a sword to a gunfight. Sling fight. Here's the whole deal. God will not send you into a battle for which He has not prepared you. God will not send you into a, well, I've been in lots of battles I wasn't prepared for. I'm not going to, let's have a talk because I'm not sure. If you went in unprepared, I'm not sure that was a battle God sent you into. God will not send you into a battle that He has not prepared you for. He has not made provision for you. Don't let others tell you how to fight the battles that God has allowed into your life. Saul thought it was supposed to be a sword fight. You need to trust what God is telling you. You need to believe that God has and He will prepare you for every battle you will face, and He will prepare you to win. I also noticed that in going into this battle, David took the initiative. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. David runs toward Goliath. I guarantee you Goliath did not expect that. Goliath would be more used to people doing something like this as the giant comes towards them. He's not used to having people running toward him. Most men run from him. This boy runs towards him. Well, here's the thing that David teaches me. Always wait for God's timing, but when God says go, go immediately. Go with a passion. Go? Now? But are you sure now? I don't know. Can I pray about it a little bit longer? And God's going, no, go now. Yep. You ever have a car that when you gave it the gas, it would stall out? Isn't that really frustrating? For those who have had that kind of thing, or it may not stall completely out, but it just, instead of getting up and going, instead of your car saying, yes, sir, and going, it just kind of, oh, you wanted to go, okay. I think of that every time I go through this story because I think, man, oh man, how frustrated God must be. How frustrated God must be when He tells us to move and we stutter and stall out on it. When God said go, David ran. When God said go, David ran. David also took experience into the valley with him. All of his previous experiences. And this kind of dovetails with what I was saying previously about fighting naturally. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be just like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. We've seen that verse a couple times. When David goes into the battle that day, he takes a willingness to let his past, the experiences of his past, count for something. He chooses to let all the times that God has given him victory in the past count towards God's credit in the present. God help me with the lion. God help me with the bear. I'm going to extend God's credit and trust Him to help me now. You ever get that notice from a bank or a credit card company where they tell you, you've been such a good customer. You've made all your payments on time. As a bonus and a blessing to you, because you're such a good customer, we are going to extend your credit. My guess is all of us have gotten that at some point. You've been such a good customer that we're going to extend your credit. Does God ever get the same courtesy from us? He's been faithful at every turn. Do we ever raise His credit limit? Or every time He asks us to do something, is it the same old battle? Well, how? Well, when? Well, why? A giant killer sees the value of the small battles, the victories and lessons learned along the way. Do you see? Do you see the value of all the battles you have fought already? Do they contribute to how you are looking at the battle? battles you currently face. You see, too many Christians want the product, which is victory, but they don't want the process, which is battles. And I will say, David took his witness into the battle, down into that valley. I wonder at times if David had any clue how many eyes were on him that day. I think we always should remember we should think about those who are going to be watching us as we fight our battles. We are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, not just in heaven, but on earth too. And I want you to think about this. There may be someone who will never beat their giant unless they see you beat yours. There are some people who will never beat their giant unless they see you beat yours. 2 Samuel 21 tells us about other giants that were killed during David's time. Ishbi-Benob, he was killed by Abishai from Bethlehem. Saph, he was killed by Sibbecai, who was an Israelite soldier and hero. Goliath the Gittite, not Goliath of Gath, different Goliath. Goliath of Gittite was killed by Elhanan, who was from Bethlehem. A huge man from Gath, Goliath's hometown, is killed by Jonathan, David's nephew. Do you notice a common denominator running through all of those? Bethlehem. Who else comes from Bethlehem? David. A soldier, an Israelite soldier, who my guess is was standing on the hillside that day, watching the battle with Goliath. Elhanan, who is, by the way, from Bethlehem, David's town. Jonathan, David's nephew. All of them, I think, have a direct connection to David. All of them know about David killing Goliath. I think all of them watched in some way. They knew they watched David beat his giant. There are people watching you in your battles too. They're going to face giants too. And I can't predict. I will just say it's possible. It's possible they will not win their battles unless they see you win yours. So David steps onto the battlefield. He throws one stone. It sinks deep into Goliath's forehead. He collapses to the ground. David rushes up, draws the giant's own sword, cuts off his head before the horrified Philistines. There's a moment of silence as it sinks into both sides what just happened. And then Saul's entire army gives this mighty shout, and they rush forward. The Philistines panic, and they begin to flee, and a tremendous victory is won for the entire nation. Because one young boy trusted God enough to step onto the battlefield and he acted as though the battle really does belong to the Lord. You see, I know we all face gigantic battles in our lives. I'm aware of some of the ones that are represented here in this room, in this church right now. And there are probably many more that I'm not aware of, but they are huge. They are titanic battles that you are fighting. They don't look like David's, but they are still just as intimidating. And the fact is, we feel fear, and we tend to cower rather than confront. We wish someone else would fight that battle for us. We'd be willing to pay them if we could. We read David's story and we're challenged. We just can't see us walking out onto that battlefield. Not voluntarily. Not into that fight. Really, not us, Lord. I just want to encourage you today, if God is telling you to walk down into that battle, not run from that giant any longer. If He is telling you to get into that battle, whatever it is, wherever it leads, pick up the 5 smooth stones that you need to take with you, that you need to carry into that fight, then walk out onto the battlefield knowing that the battle belongs to the Lord. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads together. If you are facing, I mean, as I'm talking, all of us have struggles. I think at any time in our lives, there would be struggles. But there are some that are, like I said, titanic. They're huge. They're giant battles. If you are facing one of those today, I'll invite you two different ways. The altar is open as always, and if you would like to come and just kneel at the altar, and by doing that, you are inviting others to come and pray with you. If you would like to do that, the altar is open. If you would just like to indicate that you are fighting one of those battles right now, one of those giant battles, and you just want to raise your hand just to indicate, Pastor, I am dealing with that. You can do that too, but I want you to know that if you'd like some people to pray with you, the altar is open. So, who here would say they're facing some battles? Okay, I see several of you. Yes. Any others? Okay. We have a few at the altar here. And so I'll ask if some of you would like to come up and join in prayer. I would ask you to do just that. Heavenly Father, I pray for these who are kneeling and those who have raised their hands, said that they are facing some battles right now. I am not aware of most of the battles. I don't know the details. I don't know what the struggle is, but they do and you do. Father, I pray that in this act of kind of self-revelation, of saying, I'm facing a battle right now, and I want prayers, I covet your prayers. I'm facing a battle, and I don't mind if other people know that I'm facing this battle. I'm willing to walk down into this valley, but it is kind of scary, and I want to know that this battle, that I'm doing what God wants me to do. And I want to be reminded again and again and again, the battle belongs to the Lord. Father, you know each heart here. And our desire is to honor you. Our desire is to honor you with our lives. And let people see us fighting and winning against our giants so that they can win against theirs. Now, Lord, we're going to leave this place. We're going to head out into the world, into our jobs, our homes, our families, our neighborhoods. And some of those places are where those battles are. But we are going with the assurance that you do give us victory. And you have prepared us. And you will be with us. And victory is yours. Be with your people now, Lord. I pray this in Jesus' name.